Studio by the Conservative MP Chris Philp, and Labour's Shadow Brexit Minister Paul Blomfield is still with us. Paul Blomfield, 7 Labour MPs rebelled last night. Is there anything that you'll be saying to them, bearing in mind there was a 3-line whip on this?
Well, I think they probably know the views of the majority of the parliamentary party, and frankly...
Is that it?
Frankly, given the build-up to that vote, that was a pretty small rebellion. And if you compare it with the deep divisions in the Conservative Party, we have the extraordinary phenomenon...
We had no rebels. We had 0.
Well, let me just make the point. Suella Fernandez, who is a Treasury Parliamentary Private Secretary, is openly organising in rebellion against the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, that's division.
Right, explain that to me. What sort of rebellion is she organising?
Well,
she works in the Treasury, so what's she organising?
As convener of the European Research Group, which is the sort of extreme Brexit faction inside the Conservative Party, she's been coordinating a letter seeking to kick out the idea that there should be smooth transitional arrangements by some membership or continuation of the single market participation in the customs union, which is what Philip Hammond wants.
Right, and just before I come to you on that, Chris Philp, but Chris does make a good point. There weren't any rebels on the Tory side. So, as I say again, the discipline in the Labour Party, if you don't want to look at the ones who rebelled, what about Caroline Flint, whom we heard there, who abstained?
Well, we've all made our views very clear as a Shadow Brexit team. We've engaged very positively with Caroline. We've made our views clear to her.
Right.
She is a backbench member, and she cast her vote, or didn't cast it, as it happens, in the way that she thought fit. I think she was wrong.
Are you worried about this move by Suella Fernandez, your colleague, to put pressure on the government for a harder or tougher Brexit than is being outlined at the moment?
No, not remotely. She's arguing, and others are arguing, to implement the will of the British people expressed by a referendum. People are perfectly... This is a big debate. It's a big national debate. We're negotiating with Europe. We're debating in Parliament how to go about this quite difficult but very historic task. And it's reasonable for MPs. In fact, it's our duty to put forward different points of view about how we might...
Because you don't trust the government to do the right thing.
Remotely. And by the way, I understand her letter is pretty uncontentious and is essentially supportive, is entirely supportive of the approach the government's taking. So this is a ridiculous sort of storm in a teacup Westminster story. Let's focus on the substance of the issue, which is how we go about negotiating a good free trade deal with Europe and how we go about... how we go about executing and delivering Brexit in an orderly fashion, which this bill, even Dominic Grieve, just on that clip, admits this bill is necessary to come out of the European Union in an orderly fashion, yet Labour, irresponsibly and opportunistically, voted against it.
Right. Paul Blomfield?
Well, Suella's letter...
Now, what about your opportunism? Let's talk about that.
Hang on, let him answer on the letter.
Suella's letter on the transitional deal is in direct contradiction of the position of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Conservative backbenchers have called for her to be sacked. Now, that's a division. Right.
I mean, we'll come back to that at the end. But there is a vote tonight, Chris Philp, and this is on what they call the Public Bill Committees that scrutinise the bill. And the government wants to make sure that there is a majority in favour of the Conservatives on every committee, which does go against the grain here. I mean, it's a little bit like marking your own homework and always awarding yourself an A star.
Well, not really. I mean, if the motion passes and the government side gets a majority of 1 on these bill committees, that will be the will of the House. So you can't talk about the government being in a minority. If we win the vote, by definition, we'll be in a majority. It's not possible to govern without having a majority on the bill committees. And in fact, when Labour were in precisely the same position in 1976, they approached the problem in exactly the same way.
Right, well, you're trying to compare minority governments here, but you do have a majority. You do have a working majority in that sense.
Yeah.
So why do you have to use Jeremy Corbyn's words, rig Parliament?
Well, it's not rigging Parliament. There's going to be a vote in Parliament, a democratic vote in Parliament, on the way the committee gets constituted. And if we win that vote, we'll by definition have a majority, and the committee will get constituted accordingly. So it's completely democratic. And when Labour did it in 1976, they tried to slip it through on a Friday. We're doing it openly and transparently with a vote. And if we win that vote, we will by definition have a majority.
Do you accept there need to be significant changes to this bill when MPs have the chance to scrutinise it?
Well, look, I think every bit of legislation benefits from fine-tuning from the very fine minds we have in the House of Commons, including Dominic Grieve. And of course there are bits that I'm sure can be improved upon. I mentioned one of them in my speech yesterday. But the second reading last night was about the principle of the bill, and Dominic Grieve, the House of Lords Constitutional Committee, even Keir Starmer, in his opening speech, accepted we need to have something like this to get through those 1,000 statutory instruments. And it was, I think, unacceptable for Labour to try and sabotage the process by voting against it at second reading. You could have amended it at committee stage.
Right. Well, do you accept that this does need to be able to go through in order for progress to be made on Brexit, Giles Fraser, and that Labour is being opportunist, to say, and use Chris Philp's words?
Yes, I do, actually. I think it needs to go through. Remainers who are complaining that, power is being taken away from the Parliament and given to the executive. Of course, the great power snatched away from Parliament is the European Union itself. So the idea that, power is being repatriated, that's exactly what this is all about, and that's why it needs to go through. However, Dominic Grieve is right, is that this bill, the way in which this is being done, does also give too much power to the executive, and that really does need to be addressed in committee stage.
Right. How long should the transition period last, Paul Blomfield? There seems to be some confusion on Labour's side about what status the Single Market and Customs Union should have beyond the transition period, but let's start with how long the transition period should be.
Well, our whole focus in the whole negotiations is the right solution for the economy, for jobs and for livelihoods. And that means...
Well, everyone's right for that.
But that means that we shouldn't be putting numbers on. We should be saying that the transition period should be as short as possible, but as long as necessary.
Right. Well, that's meaningless, isn't it? I mean, are we talking 2 years? Are we talking 3 years? And should the single market be on the table beyond that?
Well, we're talking about a period in which the negotiations are completed. We imagine that that's going to be something between 2 and 4 years, but to put false obstacles in the way of successful negotiations is a stupid thing to do. It's what this government is doing in a number of ways, but it's not in the interest of the British economy.
But Paul, there's a trust issue here, isn't it? The trust issue is actually that people's perception, widespread perception, is that people like you are actually just trying to trip up the process. That actually you've got no love in your heart for leaving the European Union, and you're desperately looking for ways to stop it. And actually you say all this stuff on the surface, but actually deep down what you're trying to do is trip it up. And that's what people really think.
That may be a perception. Well, hang on a second.
Well, let him answer.
That may be a perception because it's one that some of the Brexiteers keep pushing. The truth is that those of us who did, like me and Dominic, campaign for remaining in the European Union, accept the verdict of the British people. The test for that was the vote on Article 50. I represent a constituency which voted 70% Remain. I voted to trigger Article 50 to take us out of the European Union. That will happen in March 2019. The question that this bill is about how we leave, whether it's the car crash that the current government are creating or whether we have a smooth transition.
We're going to have to finish